All right, so we spent the first 3 weeks before Christmas talking about the why. Why do you want to do data governance? What is it? Why do you want to do a vision? Why do you want to do a data strategy? And now we're getting into kind of the how. So we're kind of making the assumption you've made the case. So it's kind of now moving on to the next steps. And the key part of the next steps is to think about what is an operating model? Why do I need one? Where does it fit? How do I build one? What does it look like? So we're going to spend most of this webinar where I was going to talk through kind of our template for the model. But I'm going to talk first just about a little bit about why you need one and kind of what it looks like and all of that kind of stuff. So this is quite a busy slide. So let me just try and kind of cover it off in sections. But the important thing, so we talk about data governance operating model. Some people call it a data operating model. Some people call it a data TOM, a target operating model. You can call it what you like. But what it is absolutely foundational to kind of create, but more importantly, to maintain any capability. Because remember before Christmas, we talked about creating a capability that you can apply to the bit of your university that needs it the most. So even if you don't have a data strategy, you still need this because you need to be able to operate it. Essentially, if you think of the strategy almost as like the marketing document for data, this is the operator's handbook. This is how you run it. This is how you land your strategy. This is how you run your data governance operation. So it's almost like if I bought an appliance, I wanted a handbook, this is the handbook. This is how you do it, soup to nuts. So we do this. So what's in the operating model is the key thing we do is we codify the roles. And you'll have heard us and other people talk about data owners, data stewards, data producers, data guardians, all of this kind of stuff. And the names of the roles are less important about what they do. We've got an overview of the roles in the next slide, and we can talk some more about that. But the key thing is this thing makes it look real. These are not new jobs. There is one new job that Rav will talk about, but these are roles. Especially the stewards are definitely already doing them. The owners, we need them to do it. And that's why we kind of need this senior management support. So kind of one of the maxims of data management is that you can't push data management up. You have to push it down. So you have to have the idea of we need to do better data governance. That allows us to manage our data better. So you need that senior sponsorship so that you can kind of push this stuff down. So a lot of people we know have got operating models, but they can't implement them because they've never been able to get the sponsorship to do so. And the design, so you've got two parts of your operating model. You've got design and run, right? So when you design an operating model, it's really important to think about what it's going to focus on. It's one of the questions we're going to ask you at the end. For those of you who joined us in the first webinar, we put a slide up saying, are you going to be more about reducing risk, more about increasing opportunity? And again, this applies all the way through all these webinars, that what you choose will affect how you build your operating model. You absolutely need to think about how your existing accountability works. So there may be, post 2018, there will be some kind of GDPR framework in place. Potentially, you have got data managers, information asset owners, all of that kind of stuff. You're definitely going to have cybersecurity. So you've already got people kind of looking at data through a number of lenses. So your operating model has to take that into account. You can't just suddenly say, this operating model is primarily about quality. It's about the business use of data. It's not so much about those other things, but it absolutely has to interface with those. It has to have a way of operating in the environment that already exists. You can't just kind of go, we're going to build a whole new operating model, and we're not going to take into effect that the university is already kind of managing its data badly or well through other lenses of data. We'll show you in a later webinar a slide that will help with this, and it'll certainly help you get it across to people that find this stuff quite difficult, because people do find this stuff difficult. But our operating model is focused primarily on the governance and quality of our data. So do we actually have to have it? You absolutely do. If you don't have a data governance operating model, whatever you call it, then you don't have any way to design, deploy, and sustain any capability around data governance. You absolutely have to have it. It's the thing that allows you, it's the levers that allow you to fix stuff, to allow you to prioritize stuff, to allow you to make stuff better, to educate people. It's kind of the engine room of your data governance capability. It needs to feel like it's its own thing. It needs to have its own DG manager. I was going to talk about that. And we really talk about, and it's easier now, but we talk about it's got to have kind of an office, and whether that's a kind of a SharePoint presence, some way to make this thing like it feels very real, it's visible, it's a thing, it's not going away, it has features and benefits. We do stuff, I think we're going to do in a later webinar, talk about charters, like how you create a charter, what's in, what's out, So it has to feel, you kind of have to fake it before you make it a little bit with this. So it needs to, you need to do everything. I've talked about this a lot. You have to, everything with your operating model needs to feel more professional than anything else about data at the university. So people say, hey, this is a thing I want to engage with. This is a real thing. So it's really well designed. It's really well thought of. And to help you do that, again, you need the sustained senior management sponsorship saying, this is a thing, it's not going away, it's not a flash in the pan, we're going to do this from now on, this is now business as usual, and it needs vocal champions to explain the value of it. So that's kind of what's the operating model in as few words as possible. Rav, do you want to crack on?
Yeah.
So Rav's now going to talk you through a little bit on the roles very quickly and then straight into the model. So go for it, Rav.
Yeah. Okay, so Alex mentioned that there has to be a kind of set number of roles that are well defined as that make up the operating model. And these are the absolute anchor. You'd have no operating model if you don't have some of these roles in place and defined. Now, what's critical is the point that Alex made, which is that there'll be some of these roles that kind of exist in a proxy way already in your institutions. They just haven't been formalized. But I'll go through the main three roles that are part of the new operating model that come under the banner of data governance. And those are top middle, a data executive, and that is somebody of the most senior status that can sponsor the whole program. So that vocality at that level is really critical to get everybody else on board in terms of what the institution's trying to achieve in its data space. You then have a data owner who is then made accountable for a certain or a number of domains of data. And when we talk about domains of data, we mean groups. So we might have student as a group of data, and then there might be subdomains such as applicants, enrollments, graduates, that type of thing. And then stewards. And the stewards are the ones that are the closest to the data and understand how the data fits in the systems and the processing that goes on behind it. Now, those three are new labeled roles within an operating model, but they will exist in some sort of proxy. I think the one that maybe doesn't, that might need much more kind of focus and effort on, is a data exec. So that sponsorship at that highest level might be something that needs a lot more effort putting into it to make people at the senior level understand what we're trying to get and what we're trying to achieve and the steps that we need to take to get there. But owners and stewards, regardless of the terms, there'll be some of that activity within the role descriptions that already happens within the business. Now, owner and steward are terms that we've just put in this example model. But there are a number of names that are applied to these roles because, sometimes I'd say a lot more now than there used to be. There's some unease around labeling people owners of data. Yeah. So there's loads of different terms. There's guardians, there's custodians. The terminology has to fit with the way that your institution would best receive them. But ultimately, the roles there themselves are as they kind of have been described, which is they are accountable for the data and they're responsible for making sure that the data meets quality standards that have been agreed through the framework. Now, the other roles there around there on the bottom, the bottom left two and the right two, these are all people that will kind of make the framework run. The key part there is the data governance team. Now that is something that has to be new. Like Alex said, that they have to have some authority and they have to have some sort of office. There it says team, but the likelihood is we're talking about one person, 1 to 2 people that has to manage the framework. Now, this is what gives the kind of gravitas to the whole data governance operating model. And I'll describe more about that when we see the kind of the best practice version in the next slide. But we then have the people that actually create the data, the people that use the data, and of course we cannot forget that IT are critical partners, because although they will not be assigned ownership of data as such, they manage the systems that all the data lives in. And wherever possible, we should partner with our colleagues in IT so that they, one, understand what the framework is doing and how they can engage, but two, that they can support some of the initiatives that might be coming out. 'Cause sometimes it's not data that's wrong, it might be systems that need to be amended. So it's all very kind of, you can see here, there's probably no roles other than probably the exec that you would recognize as already being within your institution. Again, it's about formalizing those roles and bringing others along that, you know, maybe need to be brought on the journey as you would do naturally as you assign domains and things. But most importantly is how these roles then fit into how data is going to be managed in the future. And that's where we come to this data governance operating model. Now, it looks quite complicated. There are three key themes here. Everything in blue are the business roles. So those are the roles that I've just spoken to you through in the previous slide. We've got the specific data governance roles, and in the center of that, you can see the data governance group or the data governance team, or might be data governance manager. And then you've got supporting roles. Now, it can be a bit confusing because there are some terms that are used interchangeably. So in this example, we've used a custodian as something that a role that is different, that is kind of like works as a partner. So these are people that would champion the data governance operating model and the framework. It might be, for example, your DPO, it could be IT partners, etc., etc. So these are people that help to manage the data and really want to make sure it's being looked after. So we need to make sure we connect with those types of partners. And they may be very different to people who are assigned as owners, stewards, producers, and consumers. So you can see here in the middle of the diagram, we have got the team manages the whole framework and the operating model. So you can see now why it is critical to have a new role as a minimum one of a data governance manager or head of data governance that makes sure that everything is connected and everybody's doing what they need to do. So the center of that is about assessing quality of data and supporting the roles within the data governance operating model in how they are accountable and need to be quality assuring their data. So you can see there that there's three lines coming out on the left side that says that the group in the middle has to support the owner, the steward, and to some extent the producer, but I'd say that line is much more firmer between the steward and the producer. But alongside that group is also responsible for publishing documentation. So data glossary, which is what does this term mean? Where is it used? Who owns that term? So this is where your owners and things become much more published in the sense of what their responsibilities are. And the classic example we use there is what's the definition of a student? There'll be 101 different definitions. So what a glossary tends to do is try to really sift out what the different definitions are and try to create a consistency in data language. There's also quality reports that are published, because how can owners and stewards do their role without knowing what the standard of data is and what work they and their teams need to do? And then there are conceptual data models, and that is about a blueprint of the data that exists within the institution. And it is not system specific. It's very much at a conceptual level. It's what kind of buckets and sub buckets of data exist, which can be applied regardless of which system, who it's owned by, where it's managed, etc., etc. So that is the model in a nutshell. I know that is a really quick run through. I think Alex and I could talk about this for a long time, but this kind of shows you the absolute critical anchor as being the data governance team, and that high level committee then, which is that senior level that makes decisions and prioritizes activities. Alex, did you want to say anything before I move on?
That's a good whistle stop tour, because normally Rav and I will spend 20 minutes talking about this. I think the only thing is, as I put in the notes, it's good not to create new groups if you don't need them, and it's very helpful. We talked about those lenses of data, cybersecurity, information security, something else. If they're in the data governance committee together, that's kind of where all the data comes together. So there's not this kind of silo approach to data. There's an understanding that there are different views of it, but it needs to come together somewhere, and that's the group for it. That's what makes that group very powerful. Otherwise, no. And again, if you've got questions, just come back and ask us, and we can talk through more detail on the model. But no, I think that's a good one for today, Rav.
Okay.
All right, super quick before we get to voting is, we weren't sure about showing this slide. We're going to show this slide very briefly. We'll actually show it a lot more next time when we talk about how do you start. But we wanted just to show you what's kind of in the operating model. So those 12 boxes under the implementation bit, that's what's in the model. We're going to talk to you about which bits of those you need to design when you start, and which bits you need to do first. And we're going to talk about that next week when we talk about where do you start. But you can see in here, you've kind of got the development side, the project. And here we've talked to you about strategy. We've not talked about MAs or other stuff, but here's the kind of design of it. We design the operating model, we measure it on the right hand side, but the meat of it is those 12 boxes, and that's kind of what that's your handbook. That's how you build and run the framework. So we just want to introduce this slide today, because we're going to show you and work through that next week. Okay, go for it, Rav.
Right, so as is usually the case, we've got to the end of the main content, and we like to ask you to engage in an activity with us. I've put the forms link in the chat, so you should all be able to access that. And like Alex said right at the beginning, what we want to do is, first of all, reassess. So, there's a fair bit of time that's passed between the first session when we did this and now. And now we're at a point where we're thinking about what operating model will fit well in our institutions. It's good to think about whether your opinion about what approach to building a DG capability, how best, which kind of approach would best land. So we're asking you again to have a rethink. If it's the same, that's fine, but we thought we'd give you the opportunity to vote which approach would be the most well received within your institution. And then we wanted to ask you about anything that does already exist. So I think Alex and I have said quite a lot now through this session that a lot of what we've shown to you will exist in some sort of proxy. There will be areas of best practice. There will be some things that already are operating in a certain informal way. So anything that you know of that exists, or that you could hang a more formalized data governance operating model off, we'd like you just to kind of make some notes on that. And again, this is optional. There is a statement on the form that says how we're going to use the information you send us, but this is very much for us to be able to send you back the responses to each of these activities, so that you have a little bit of an outline that you can use as a starting point for any discussions you might want to have internally.
Can you just pop on the next slide, Rav, and then the last one? So I want to show some people what they may not have seen. So next time we're going to talk about how do you start to build an operating model, what do you choose, and that's kind of kind of a little bit what we've asked you today. So we're going to give you the kind of view, the start for 10, saying I want to start, how do I do it? So hopefully that will really kind of bring this stuff to life. But I wanted just to show you the last slide, so not the next one, rather the one after that, which is, we've got this reading list, we keep adding to it. So what we've added today is, one of the things we get asked the most is, where does information governance, GDPR, fit with data governance? Is it the same thing? No, it isn't. So Rav wrote a really good document. We're actually going to write a blog about this, but the document is on our website. It's in the resources section. It's linked off this slide, which we'll publish on Thursday, I think. So just to let you know that there is some stuff in there that if you do want to read some more, we keep adding to this list on the left, and there will be, that'll either be on our website or signposted externally. So do feel free to get involved with that if that's a use, because we know they're the kind of questions we get asked. So every time we do a webinar where there's some useful content, we will add some things to this list at the end. Just wanted to highlight that in case you hadn't seen it. So I think that's us done, Rav, is it?
That is us done, yeah.
20 minutes on the dot.